The sound of steel against steel echoed through the marble halls at 3 in the morning, when the palace should have been silent as a tomb. Captain Marcus Blackwood pressed his back against the cold stone wall, his heart pounding like war drums as he peered around the corner. What he saw in that moonlit corridor would shatter everything he believed about honor, loyalty, and the royal family he had sworn to protect with his life. Captain Marcus Blackwood had served the Royal Guard of Valdemar for 12 years, and in all that time, he had never questioned the sacred duty that ran through his veins like blood. The palace of Valdemar stood like a fortress of white marble and gold, its towers reaching toward the heavens as if to touch the very gods themselves. Within these walls lived the royal family that had ruled the kingdom for 3 centuries, and Marcus had dedicated his life to ensuring their safety. The night began like any other. Marcus walked his rounds through the endless corridors, his leather boots making soft sounds against the polished floors. The palace at night was a different creature than during the day. Gone were the bustling servants, the clicking heels of court ladies, and the deep voices of ministers discussing affairs of state. In the darkness, the palace breathed with a life of its own, full of shadows and secrets that daylight chased away. Marcus paused at one of the tall windows that looked out over the royal gardens. The moon hung full and bright in the clear sky, casting silver light across the perfectly trimmed hedges and marble fountains. Everything appeared peaceful, exactly as it should be. The kingdom of Valdemar had enjoyed 20 years of peace under King Edmund's rule, and his son, Prince Adrian, was beloved by the people for his kindness and wisdom. As Marcus continued his patrol, his thoughts turned to Prince Adrian. At 28 years old, the prince had grown from a mischievous boy into a man worthy of the crown he would one day wear. Adrian possessed his father's strong jaw and piercing blue eyes, but where the king was stern and traditional, the prince brought new ideas and fresh energy to the court. He spoke of building schools for poor children and creating better trade relationships with neighboring kingdoms. The people loved him for it, but Marcus had noticed that not everyone in the palace shared their enthusiasm. The first sign that something was wrong came as Marcus approached the east wing of the palace. This section housed the private chambers of the royal family, and it was always heavily guarded. Tonight, however, the usual sentries were nowhere to be seen. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. In 12 years of service, he had never seen the royal quarters left unprotected. Marcus quickened his pace, his hand instinctively moving to the sword at his side. His training kicked in, and every sense became sharp and alert. He moved through the shadows like a ghost, using the skills that had made him the youngest captain in the history of the Royal Guard. As he drew closer to Prince Adrian's chambers, he could hear voices speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Pressing himself against the wall, Marcus crept forward until he could see into the prince's private sitting room. What he witnessed there made his blood run cold. Prince Adrian stood in the center of the room, still wearing his evening clothes, but his usually perfect appearance was disheveled. His dark hair was messy, and there was something in his eyes that Marcus had never seen before. Genuine fear. Surrounding the prince were 5 men dressed in the black leather of the palace guard, but Marcus didn't recognize any of them. These were not the loyal soldiers he knew and trusted. Their faces were hard and cruel, and the way they held their weapons suggested they were prepared to use them. At their head stood a tall, thin man with cold grey eyes and a scar that ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth. "Your Highness," the scarred man said, his voice smooth as silk but deadly as poison, "you have caused us a great deal of trouble. Did you really think you could expose our operation without consequences?" Prince Adrian lifted his chin defiantly, and Marcus felt a surge of pride at his courage. Even faced with overwhelming odds, the prince refused to show weakness. "I know what you and your people have been doing, Lord Castor," Adrian said, his voice steady despite the danger. "The missing grain shipments, the taxes that never reached the treasury, the weapons being sold to our enemies, I have proof of everything. Lord Castor." Marcus knew that name. Castor Grimm was the king's senior advisor, a man who had served the crown for over 20 years. He was trusted by King Edmund and respected throughout the court. The idea that he could be involved in treason was almost impossible to believe, yet here was the evidence before Marcus's own eyes. "Proof?" Lord Castor laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "What proof could a naive young prince possibly have? Even if you have gathered some evidence, who would believe you over me? I have served your father faithfully since before you were born." "The people will believe the truth when they see it," Prince Adrian replied. "I have documents, witness statements, and records of every illegal transaction. Your network of corruption ends tonight." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Lord Castor's expression hardened, and his hand moved to the dagger at his belt. I'm afraid that's impossible, Your Highness. You see, there will be no documents, no witnesses, and no prints to tell tales. Tonight, there will be a terrible tragedy. Assassins will break into the palace and murder the beloved prince in his sleep. The king will be devastated, of course, but life must go on. Marcus felt his world tilting on its axis. This wasn't just theft or corruption. Every instinct screamed at him to charge into the room and defend his prince, but he forced himself to remain hidden. 5 armed men against 1 was suicide, and he would be of no help to Prince Adrian if he was dead. The people will know it was murder, Prince Adrian said, backing toward the window. They're not fools, Castor. When they discover your crimes, they'll know who is responsible for my death. Perhaps, Castor agreed, but I'll be there to comfort the grieving king and help him through his terrible loss. I'll guide him in his decisions and ensure that justice is done, my kind of justice. And when the old king finally dies of his broken heart, I'll be there to guide his successor as well. What successor? Prince Adrian demanded. I'm the only heir. Castor smiled, and it was the most evil expression Marcus had ever seen. Oh, but accidents happen, don't they? Kings die in hunting accidents, from sudden illnesses, from tragic falls downstairs. And when there's no clear heir, the council must choose a new ruler, someone strong and capable, someone who understands the real needs of the kingdom, someone like me. The full scope of the conspiracy was now clear. This wasn't just about money or power, it was about seizing control of the entire kingdom. Marcus realized that Lord Castor had been planning this for years, slowly building his network of corrupt officials and false guards while presenting himself as the loyal servant of the crown. Prince Adrian had somehow discovered the truth, and now he was going to die for it, unless Marcus could find a way to help him. But what could one guard do against 5 trained killers and the man who controlled much of the palace's security? The prince seemed to be thinking the same thing. His eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape route, but the fake guards had positioned themselves to block every exit. The window behind him was 3 stories above a stone courtyard. Jumping would mean certain death. I want you to know, Prince Adrian said quietly, that I'm proud to die for the truth. The kingdom deserves better than your corruption, Castor. Someday, someone will expose you for what you really are. Brave words, Castor replied, drawing his dagger. The blade gleamed wickedly in the moonlight streaming through the window, but ultimately meaningless. Guards, make this quick. We have much work to do before dawn. The 5 men began to advance on the prince, their weapons ready. Marcus knew he was out of time. In moments, Prince Adrian would be dead, and with him would die any hope of exposing the conspiracy that threatened to destroy the kingdom. But as Marcus prepared to make his desperate charge into the room, something unexpected happened. Prince Adrian suddenly threw himself backward toward the window, and at the same moment, the room erupted in chaos. The window shattered inward as dark figures crashed through the glass in an explosion of silver and shadow. Marcus blinked in confusion, trying to understand what he was seeing. These weren't more of Castor's men. These figures moved with a fluid grace that spoke of royal training, and they fought with a precision that came from years of practice. The leader of the mysterious fighters was a young woman with short auburn hair and fierce green eyes. She wielded 2 curved swords with deadly skill, cutting down 2 of Castor's guards before they could even react. Behind her came 3 more fighters, each one moving like death itself as they engaged the enemy. Impossible, Castor snarled, backing away from the unexpected assault. The royal bodyguards were all eliminated. Not all of us, the woman replied, her voice cold as winter steel. Some of us learned to hide in the shadows and wait for the right moment to strike. Marcus watched in amazement as the battle unfolded. The mysterious fighters moved like dancers, their movements coordinated and precise. They clearly knew each other well and had fought together many times before. Within minutes, 4 of Castor's guards lay dead on the expensive carpet, their blood staining the rich fabric. Lord Castor found himself facing the auburn-haired woman's blade at his throat. His own dagger had been knocked from his hand, and his face had gone pale with terror. This wasn't how his plan was supposed to unfold. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice shaking. "What do you want?" "I am Commander Sarah Blackthorne of the Shadow Guard," the woman replied. "And what I want is justice for the crimes you have committed against this kingdom and its people." Marcus felt his mind reeling. The Shadow Guard was a legend, a story told to frighten children and criminals. According to the tales, they were an elite group of warriors who served as the crown's most secret protectors. operating in complete secrecy to eliminate threats that the regular guards couldn't handle. Most people believed they were nothing more than myths. Prince Adrian pulled himself to his feet, brushing glass from his clothes. Despite everything he had been through, he managed a small smile. "Commander Blackthorn, your timing is, as always, impeccable." "Your Highness?" She replied with a respectful nod. "We've been tracking Lord Castor's operation for months, waiting for him to reveal the full scope of his conspiracy. Tonight's events provided us with the final evidence we needed." Castor's eyes darted between the prince and the commander, his mind clearly racing as he tried to find some way out of his predicament. "This is all a misunderstanding," he said desperately. "I was trying to protect the prince from assassins. These people broke into the palace illegally. They're the real criminals. Save your lies for someone who might believe them," Commander Blackthorn replied. "We have records of every theft, every bribe, and every act of treason you have committed. Your network of corruption has been completely exposed." As Marcus continued to watch from the shadows, he saw Prince Adrian step forward to face the man who had tried to murder him. The fear was gone from the prince's eyes now, replaced by a cold determination that reminded Marcus strongly of the king. "Lord Castor," Prince Adrian said formally, "by the authority granted to me as heir to the throne of Valdemar, I place you under arrest for high treason, conspiracy to commit murder, theft from the royal treasury, and crimes against the people of this kingdom." "You can't prove anything!" Castor spat, but even as he said it, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He knew it was over. "Actually," Commander Blackthorn said, "we can. We have detailed records of all your financial transactions, witness statements from your victims, and testimony from several of your own men who agreed to cooperate in exchange for lighter sentences. Your empire of corruption is finished." Marcus felt a surge of relief so strong it made his knees weak. The prince was safe, the conspiracy was exposed, and justice would be served. But even as he celebrated, he knew that this was only the beginning. The revelation that such a massive conspiracy had existed within the palace would send shockwaves throughout the kingdom. As the Shadow Guard began to secure the scene and tend to Prince Adrian's minor injuries, Marcus finally stepped out of the shadows. It was time to reveal his presence and offer his assistance in whatever came next. "Your Highness," he called out, entering the room with his hands visible to show he meant no threat. "Captain Marcus Blackwood, Royal Guard. I witnessed everything that happened here tonight." Prince Adrian turned to him with a look of relief. "Captain Blackwood, thank the gods you're here. We're going to need every loyal guard we can find in the coming days."
Commander Blackthorn studied Marcus with sharp, calculating eyes.
"How long were you watching, Captain?" "Long enough to understand the full scope of Lord Castor's treachery," Marcus replied. "And long enough to know that the palace will never be the same after tonight." It was true. The events of this night would change everything. The people would learn that their beloved royal family had been under threat from within, that trusted advisors had been stealing from them and planning to murder their future king. The very foundations of the kingdom's government would have to be examined and rebuilt. But as Marcus looked at Prince Adrian, standing tall despite everything he had endured, he felt a spark of hope. This was a man who would not let his kingdom fall to corruption and evil. This was a prince who was willing to risk his own life to protect his people. The palace had changed forever, but perhaps that change would make it stronger than ever before. As the first rays of dawn began to creep through the shattered window, Marcus knew that his real work was just beginning. The conspiracy was exposed, but there would be more challenges ahead. Other corrupt officials would need to be identified and removed. The people would need to be told the truth about what had happened, and most importantly, the kingdom would need to be protected while it healed from the wounds that had been inflicted upon it. But for now, Prince Adrian was safe. Lord Castor was captured, and the truth was finally coming to light. It was enough to make even the most cynical guard believe that justice might actually prevail. As the Shadow Guard began their methodical work of securing the crime scene, Marcus found himself studying the faces of these legendary warriors. Commander Blackthorn moved with the confidence of someone who had seen countless battles, her green eyes constantly scanning for threats even in this moment of victory. Her three companions worked silently, efficiently, binding Castor's hands and gathering evidence with practiced skill. The room itself told a story of violence and betrayal. Expensive furniture lay overturned, precious vases had been shattered in the struggle, and the magnificent Persian carpet bore dark stains that would never wash clean. The broken window let in the cool morning air, stirring the heavy curtains and bringing with it the scent of the palace gardens, a reminder that life continued beyond these walls, unaware of the drama that had unfolded within. Prince Adrian moved to his writing desk, which had somehow survived the chaos intact. With steady hands, he opened a hidden compartment that Marcus hadn't even known existed. From within, the prince retrieved a leather portfolio bound with red ribbon. "The evidence I spoke of," Adrian explained, holding up the portfolio. "Months of careful investigation, documentation of every crime, every stolen coin, every betrayal of the people's trust." Commander Blackthorne wasn't the only one gathering information about Lord Caster's activities. Commander Blackthorne raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. "Your Highness conducted his own investigation?" "That was extremely dangerous." "Dangerous perhaps," Prince Adrian replied, "but necessary. I couldn't stand by and watch while the people I'm sworn to protect were being robbed and betrayed. A future king must be willing to fight for justice, even if it means risking his own life." Marcus felt a surge of pride and admiration for his prince. Here was a man who truly understood the weight of the crown he would one day wear. Too many nobles lived in comfort while their subjects suffered, but Prince Adrian was different. He was willing to put himself in harm's way to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Lord Caster, now securely bound and guarded by 2 members of the Shadow Guard, watched the proceedings with barely concealed rage. His carefully constructed mask of respectability had been torn away, revealing the bitter, greedy man underneath. "You think this changes anything?" he snarled at Prince Adrian. "You think the people will thank you for destroying the stability I've created? I brought order to this kingdom's finances. I made the difficult decisions that your father was too weak to make. You call theft and murder difficult decisions?" Prince Adrian asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "You call selling weapons to our enemies bringing order? You've betrayed everything this kingdom stands for." "I've done what was necessary to survive in a world that devours the weak," Caster shot back. "Your father's naive idealism would have bankrupted this kingdom within a decade. I saved Valdemar from his foolish generosity." Marcus had heard enough. He stepped forward, his hand resting on his sword hilt. "You will speak respectfully of His Majesty the King, or I will forget my duty to take you alive." Caster's eyes flicked to Marcus's face, and for the first time that night, he seemed to truly see the captain. "Ah, Marcus Blackwood, I remember you, the eager young guardsman who thought he could change the world through loyalty and honor. How does it feel to learn that your precious royal family needed criminals to keep them in power?" "Your crimes don't reflect on the royal family," Marcus replied firmly. "They reflect on you and you alone. The fact that you operated in secret proves that you knew what you were doing was wrong." Commander Blackthorne checked a pocket watch and frowned. "Your Highness, dawn is breaking. Soon the palace will be awakening for the new day. We need to decide how to proceed with Lord Caster and the information we've gathered." Prince Adrian nodded thoughtfully. "The king must be informed immediately, of course. But we also need to move quickly to secure the rest of Caster's network. How many of his accomplices do we know about?" 17 confirmed conspirators within the palace," Commander Blackthorne replied. "Another dozen in the city, including merchants who helped move stolen goods, and officials who falsified documents. We've been watching all of them, waiting for the right moment to act. And that moment is now," Prince Adrian said decisively. "Commander, I want every conspirator arrested before the sun rises fully. We can't give them time to destroy evidence or flee the kingdom." As plans were being made and orders given, Marcus found himself thinking about the implications of what he had witnessed. The palace would indeed never be the same. Trust, once broken, would take years to rebuild. Every advisor, every guard, every servant would be viewed with suspicion, until they could prove their loyalty beyond doubt. But perhaps that wasn't entirely a bad thing. Perhaps the palace had grown too comfortable, too trusting. Perhaps a little healthy suspicion would prevent future conspiracies from taking root. The price of freedom, as the old saying went, was eternal vigilance. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor interrupted his thoughts. Commander Blackthorne immediately tensed, her hand moving to her sword, but Prince Adrian raised a hand to stop her. "That will be Captain Reynolds with the Morning Guard," Adrian explained. "He's one of the few I'm certain we can trust." Indeed, moments later, Captain James Reynolds appeared in the doorway, his weathered face taking in the scene with the practiced eye of a 30-year veteran. Reynolds had been Marcus's mentor when he first joined the Royal Guard, and there wasn't a more loyal or honest man in the entire kingdom. "Your Highness," Reynolds said, bowing respectfully before his gaze fell on the bound figure of Lord Caster. "I see the night has been more eventful than usual. More eventful than I ever hoped it would be." Prince Adrian replied grimly. Captain Reynolds, I need you to coordinate with Commander Blackthorne to secure the palace and arrest the remaining conspirators. Can I count on your discretion and loyalty? Until my dying breath, Your Highness, Reynolds replied without hesitation. What are your orders? As the three experienced military leaders began planning their coordinated strikes against the conspiracy network, Marcus found himself watching Lord Castor's face. The man who had once seemed so powerful and untouchable now looked old and defeated. His grand schemes had crumbled in a single night, brought down by the very prince he had tried to murder. But Castor's expression troubled Marcus. Even defeated, even caught red-handed, there was still a glint of something in the traitor's eyes. Not hope exactly, but perhaps defiance. As if he knew something that the others didn't. As if this wasn't quite the end of the story. Tell me, Lord Castor, Marcus said quietly, moving closer to the bound man. Is there something else, some other plan you haven't told us about? Castor's lips curved in a cold smile. Wouldn't you like to know, Captain? Do you really think a conspiracy of this magnitude could exist without contingency plans? Without fail-safes? A chill ran down Marcus's spine.
What kind of fail-safes?
The kind that ensure the crown doesn't survive even if I don't, Castor replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Did you think I was the only one with ambitions? Did you think there weren't others waiting for their chance to seize power? Before Marcus could respond, the conversation was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. Shouts and the sound of running feet echoed through the palace corridors. Commander Blackthorne immediately drew her weapon, while Prince Adrian moved toward the broken window to get a view of the courtyard below. Fire! Someone was screaming. Fire in the East Wing! Prince Adrian's face went pale. The East Wing, that's where my parents' chambers are located. Without hesitation, he started toward the door, but Commander Blackthorne blocked his path. Your Highness, this could be a diversion. We can't risk your safety. I won't hide while my parents might be in danger, Adrian replied firmly. Captain Blackwood, Captain Reynolds, with me. Commander Blackthorne, keep Lord Castor secure and continue the arrests. I'm sorry, Your Highness, but I can't allow that, Blackthorne said, her voice gentle but firm. My duty is to protect you, even from your own noble impulses. Marcus stepped forward. Then I'll go. I know every passage in this palace, every secret route. I can reach the King and Queen's chambers quickly and assess the situation. Prince Adrian looked torn, clearly wanting to go himself but recognizing the wisdom in Marcus's proposal. Very well, but take a full squad with you. And Marcus, be careful. If this is connected to Castor's conspiracy, it could be a trap. As Marcus prepared to leave, Lord Castor's laughter followed him to the door. It was a sound that would haunt his dreams for years to come. The laughter of a man who knew that his defeat was only the beginning of a larger, darker game. The palace had indeed changed forever. But as Marcus ran through the corridors toward an uncertain danger, he realized that the night's revelations might have only scratched the surface of the threats facing the kingdom of Valdemar. The acrid smell of smoke filled Marcus's nostrils as he raced through the palace corridors, his heart pounding with each step. Behind him followed 6 of his most trusted guards, their armor clanking rhythmically as they navigated the maze of passages that connected the various wings of the massive palace. The shouts of fire continued to echo through the halls, growing more urgent with each passing moment. Marcus had memorized every inch of this palace during his 12 years of service, but tonight the familiar corridors seemed different, more ominous. Shadows danced on the walls from the flickering torches, and every corner seemed to hide potential threats. Lord Castor's words echoed in his mind, contingency plans and fail-safes that would ensure the crown didn't survive even if the primary conspiracy failed. As they approached the East Wing, the smell of smoke grew stronger, but something about it troubled Marcus. He had experienced real fires before, and this scent was wrong somehow. It carried chemical undertones that didn't belong in a wood and stone building fire. His suspicions deepened when they encountered their first palace servant fleeing from the supposed blaze. Thomas! Marcus called to the young man, who was one of the king's personal attendants. What's the situation ahead? Thomas stopped, his face flushed with exertion and fear. Captain Blackwood, thank the gods. There's smoke everywhere in the royal quarters, but we can't find the actual fire. The smoke just appeared suddenly, as if from nowhere. The king and queen have been evacuated to the West Tower, but several of the guards are missing. Missing guards. Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. Missing how? Did they go to fight the fire? That's just it, sir, Thomas replied, wringing his hands nervously. They were there one moment, at their posts outside the king's chamber. And then, when the smoke began, they simply vanished. No one saw them leave, and they haven't reported to any of the rally points. Marcus exchanged glances with his men. This was no accidental fire. It was a coordinated attack, designed to separate the royal family and create chaos throughout the palace. Thomas, return to the West Tower immediately. Tell whoever is guarding their majesties that they're to trust no one except guards they've known personally for years. No new faces, no matter what authority they claim to have. As Thomas hurried away, Marcus led his squad deeper into the east wing. The smoke grew thicker as they advanced, forcing them to cover their faces with their cloaks. The chemical smell was now unmistakable. This was artificial smoke, probably created by some kind of alchemical mixture designed to create panic and confusion without actually burning down the palace. They found the source of the smoke in a storage room near the royal chambers. Several clay pots had been broken on the floor, and their contents, a mixture of sulfur, saltpeter, and other chemicals, were still producing thick, choking clouds. But more disturbing than the smoke pots were the signs of struggle throughout the room. Furniture was overturned, weapons lay scattered on the floor, and dark stains on the stones suggested that blood had been spilled. "Sir," one of Marcus's men called from the corner of the room, "you need to see this." Marcus approached and found Sergeant William Hayes, one of the king's personal guards, bound and gagged behind an overturned cabinet. Hayes was conscious but badly beaten, with a deep gash across his forehead and bruises covering his face. Marcus quickly cut the ropes and helped the sergeant sit up. "Sergeant Hayes, what happened here?" Marcus asked urgently. Hayes coughed and spat, trying to clear the smoke from his lungs. "Ambush, sir. Men dressed as palace guards, but I'd never seen them before. They came from 3 directions at once, professional-like. They knew exactly where to hit and how to disable us quickly." "How many were there?" "At least 8, maybe more. They were after the king and queen specifically, asking questions about their location, their routines, their security arrangements." Hayes struggled to his feet, swaying slightly. "Sir, these weren't common criminals. They moved like trained soldiers, and they knew things about the palace layout that outsiders shouldn't know." Marcus felt the pieces of the puzzle beginning to fall into place. The artificial fire, the coordinated attack on the guards, the specific targeting of the royal family. This was Lord Castor's contingency plan in action. But if Castor was already captured, who was leading this secondary assault? "Did you recognize any of the attackers?" Marcus pressed. "Any voices? Any identifying features?" "One of them," Hayes said, wincing as he touched the wound on his forehead. "I could swear I heard Lord Castor's nephew Victor giving orders, but that's impossible. Young Victor has been away at the military academy for 2 years. Marcus felt his blood run cold. Victor Castor was indeed supposed to be at the military academy, but what if that was just another layer of the deception? What if the young man had been secretly training not to serve the crown, but to destroy it? "Sergeant, I need you to get to the medical ward immediately," Marcus ordered. "Have your wounds treated, then report to Prince Adrian in the West Tower. Tell him exactly what you told me about Victor Castor." As Hayes was escorted away by one of Marcus's men, the captain found himself facing a terrible realization. The conspiracy was larger and more complex than any of them had imagined. Lord Castor hadn't been the mastermind. He had been a frontman, a visible target designed to draw attention away from the real powers behind the plot. Marcus and his remaining guards pressed deeper into the east wing, following the trail of the attackers. The palace that had always felt like a sanctuary now seemed like a maze of threats and hidden dangers. Every shadow could conceal an enemy. Every familiar face could belong to a traitor. They found evidence of the attackers' passage in the royal library, where ancient tapestries had been slashed and priceless books scattered across the floor. But this wasn't random vandalism. The destruction was focused on specific texts. Marcus noticed that genealogical records had been particularly targeted, along with legal documents relating to succession laws. "They're trying to destroy records," Marcus realized aloud. "If they can't seize power through conspiracy, they're trying to create a succession crisis by eliminating documentation of the legitimate bloodline." One of his guards, Corporal Anne Whitmore, knelt beside a destroyed manuscript. "Sir, look at this. These aren't just royal genealogies. These are military records. Troop positions, supply routes, defensive strategies. If these documents fell into enemy hands, the implications were staggering." This wasn't just an attempt to murder the royal family. It was preparation for a full-scale invasion or civil war. Someone was planning to tear the kingdom of Valdemar apart from within, and they had been preparing for years, Marcus's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Too many footsteps, moving in formation. His hand went to his sword as he gestured for his men to take defensive positions among the library's massive wooden shelves. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by hushed voices speaking in the clipped tones of military commands. "Check every room," a male voice ordered. "The prince wasn't with the king and queen, which means he's still somewhere in the palace. Find him and eliminate any guards who try to protect him." Marcus recognized the voice with a shock that merely made him gasp aloud. It belonged to Commander Robert Sterling, the head of the palace's day guard, and a man Marcus had considered a friend and mentor. Sterling had been with the royal guard for over 20 years, had eaten at Marcus's table, had stood as godfather to the children of dozens of guardsmen. The idea that he could be involved in treason was almost beyond comprehension. But there was no mistake. Sterling's distinctive voice continued giving orders as the traitorous guards spread through the library. Marcus counted at least 10 men, all moving with the precision of experienced soldiers. They weren't palace guards at all, but professional killers who had somehow infiltrated the very heart of the kingdom's defenses. "Remember," Sterling continued, "Prince Adrian is to be taken alive if possible. The plan requires a public execution to break the people's spirit completely. But if he resists, kill him and make it look like he died heroically defending the palace." Marcus felt sick to his stomach. These weren't just criminals seeking wealth or power. They were enemies of the state, working to destroy everything that Valdemar represented. And they were led by men who had sworn sacred oaths to protect the very people they now sought to murder. Corporal Whitmore caught Marcus's eye and pointed to a narrow passage between two bookcases. Marcus nodded, understanding her suggestion. There was a secret passage there that led to the palace's hidden network of tunnels, pathways that had been built centuries ago to allow the royal family to escape during sieges. Moving silently, Marcus led his 3 remaining guards toward the passage. They would have to abandon the library to Sterling and his killers, but they could use the secret tunnels to reach Prince Adrian and warn him of the immediate danger. As they slipped into the narrow passage, Marcus heard Sterling's voice growing closer. "Search every hiding place." The captain and his men were seen entering this wing. "Find them and eliminate them. We can't afford to have any witnesses to tonight's activities." The secret passage was dark and cramped, forcing them to move in single file through air that had grown stale from centuries of disuse. Marcus led the way, using his memory of the palace's hidden architecture to navigate toward the West Tower where Prince Adrian was supposedly safe. But as they moved through the darkness, Marcus began to realize the full scope of the challenge they faced. If Commander Sterling was involved, how many other trusted officers had been compromised? How many of the guards surrounding Prince Adrian right now were actually enemies in disguise? The passage opened into a small chamber beneath the West Tower's foundation. Marcus could hear voices above them, the sounds of guards talking quietly as they maintained their watch. But were these loyal guards or more of Sterling's killers? "Sir," Corporal Whitmore whispered, "how do we know who to trust? If Sterling is involved, anyone could be." It was the question that had been haunting Marcus since they discovered the scope of the conspiracy. In a world where trusted friends could be revealed as deadly enemies, how could anyone be certain of loyalty? "We trust no one we haven't served with for years," Marcus replied quietly. "And we watch everyone's actions, not their words. Traitors might be able to lie, but they can't hide their intentions forever." They climbed a narrow stone staircase that emerged in the tower's lower level. Marcus listened carefully at the door before opening it slowly. The corridor beyond was empty except for 2 guards standing at attention near the staircase leading to the upper floors. Marcus recognized both men, Sergeant Peter Donovan and Corporal James Fletcher, both veterans of more than a decade of loyal service. But recognition wasn't enough anymore. He needed to test their allegiance without revealing his suspicions. "Sergeant Donovan," Marcus called out as he emerged from the hidden passage. "Report on the situation." Donovan turned with obvious relief. "Captain Blackwood, thank the gods you're safe. The entire palace is in chaos. We've had reports of fires, missing guards, and strangers in the corridors. Prince Adrian is safe on the upper level with Captain Reynolds, but we're not certain who we can trust anymore." The response seemed genuine, and Marcus knew Donovan well enough to read his body language. The man's concern appeared real, not feigned. But appearances could be deceiving. "Have you seen Commander Sterling tonight?" Marcus asked carefully, watching for any reaction. Donovan's face darkened. "Aye, sir. He came through about an hour ago with a group of guards I didn't recognize. Said they were from the night patrol, reassigned to help with security. But something felt wrong about them. They asked too many questions about Prince Adrian's exact location. Where did Sterling go? He said he was heading to coordinate with the King's guards, but Donovan hesitated, then continued. Sir, I've served under Commander Sterling for 15 years. I trust him with my life. But tonight, something was different about him. The way he looked at the prince's door, the questions he asked, it didn't feel right. Marcus felt a surge of relief. If Donovan had noticed Sterling's suspicious behavior, it meant that loyalty and observation could still distinguish between friends and enemies. There was still hope that the conspiracy could be defeated. Sergeant, I need you to listen very carefully, Marcus said urgently. Commander Sterling is involved in a plot to assassinate the royal family. The men with him are not palace guards, they're killers. We need to warn Prince Adrian immediately and prepare for an assault on this tower. Donovan's face went pale, but his hand moved instinctively to his weapon. Fletcher stepped closer, his own face grim with determination. These were loyal men, Marcus realized with relief. Whatever else happened tonight, he had found allies he could trust. Sir, what are your orders? Donovan asked. Before Marcus could answer, the sound of many boots on stone echoed from the main staircase. Sterling and his false guards were returning, and this time they weren't being subtle about their approach. Positions, Marcus ordered quietly. No one reaches Prince Adrian without proving their loyalty beyond any doubt. As the footsteps grew closer, Marcus found himself thinking about the young prince upstairs, unaware that his most trusted protectors had become his greatest threats. The palace had indeed changed forever, but the final outcome of that change would depend on the courage and loyalty of the few good men who remained. The real battle for the kingdom of Valdemar was about to begin. The footsteps on the staircase grew louder and more deliberate, echoing through the stone tower like a funeral drum. Marcus positioned himself at the head of the corridor, with Donovan and Fletcher flanking him on either side. Corporal Whitmore and the other surviving guards from his squad took positions behind overturned furniture, creating a makeshift defensive line. Marcus's mind raced as he tried to calculate their odds. Sterling would likely have at least 10 men with him, all professionally trained killers. Against them stood 5 loyal guards in a narrow corridor with limited escape routes. The mathematics of survival were not encouraging. Remember, Marcus whispered to his men, our job isn't to win. It's to buy time and protect the prince. If we can hold them here long enough, reinforcements might arrive. But even as he said it, Marcus wondered what reinforcements could be trusted. How deep did the conspiracy go? How many of the guards throughout the palace were loyal to the crown, and how many served other masters? The footsteps stopped just around the bend in the staircase. Marcus could hear hushed voices conferring, planning their approach. Sterling was too experienced to simply charge up the stairs into an ambush. He would have a strategy, a way to neutralize the defenders while minimizing his own losses. The attack, when it came, was not what Marcus expected. Instead of an assault up the main staircase, the first indication of trouble came from behind them. Corporal Whitmore spun around with a sharp intake of breath. Sir! Movement in the secret passage. Marcus cursed silently. Of course Sterling would know about the hidden passages. He had been studying the palace's defenses for years. Preparing for this moment, the commander was attacking from multiple directions simultaneously, dividing the defenders and creating chaos. Fletcher, take 2 men and seal that passage, Marcus ordered. Whatever it takes, don't let anyone through. As Fletcher moved to comply, the sound of splintering wood came from above. Someone was breaking down doors in the upper levels of the tower, moving systematically toward Prince Adrian's location. Time was running out, faster than Marcus had anticipated. The main attack began with a crossbow bolt that whistled past Marcus's ear and embedded itself in the stone wall behind him. Sterling's men had reached the top of the staircase and were using ranged weapons to soften the defense before their assault. Shields up, Marcus called, though none of them actually carried shields. They pressed themselves against the walls and used their cloaks to deflect the deadly bolts as best they could. Then Sterling himself appeared at the head of the staircase, and Marcus felt his world shift once again. This wasn't the man he had known for years, the kind mentor who had taught him sword techniques, the loyal officer who had stood beside the royal family through countless ceremonies and celebrations. This Sterling's eyes were cold and calculating, filled with a hatred that Marcus had never suspected existed. Captain Blackwood, Sterling called out, his voice carrying easily down the corridor. You've caused us a considerable amount of trouble tonight. This could all end very simply if you and your men would just step aside. You know I can't do that, Marcus replied, surprised by how steady his own voice sounded. I swore an oath to protect the royal family. I intend to honor it. Sterling laughed, and the sound was like ice cracking. Oaths? Honor? You still believe in those naive concepts? Let me tell you about honor, Marcus. Honor is watching the kingdom you love being destroyed by weak leadership and doing nothing about it. Honor is standing by while incompetent nobles make decisions that cost the lives of common soldiers. What are you talking about? Marcus demanded, genuinely confused. The border wars 3 years ago, Sterling said, his voice growing heated. Remember those? King Edmund's diplomatic solution that cost us 200 good men. My son James was among them, Marcus. He died because our king was too weak to make the hard choices that war requires. Marcus did remember the border conflicts, and he remembered James Sterling, a promising young officer who had been killed in an ambush that could have been prevented with better intelligence. But grief, he realized, could poison even the most loyal heart. James died serving his kingdom, Marcus said carefully. His sacrifice meant something. His sacrifice meant nothing, Sterling roared. He died for a king who cared more about appearing merciful than protecting his own people. Well, I've spent 3 years making sure that never happens again. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. This wasn't about greed or power. It was about revenge. Sterling truly believed he was saving the kingdom by destroying the royal family. That made him infinitely more dangerous than a simple criminal. Commander, Marcus said, trying to reach whatever remained of the man he had once respected. James wouldn't want this. He believed in the crown, in the kingdom's ideals. You're destroying everything he died for. I'm completing what he started, Sterling replied coldly, building a stronger Valdemar, one that won't be held back by royal sentiment and weakness. The philosophical debate was interrupted by a crash from the secret passage behind them. Fletcher and his men were engaged in desperate combat with infiltrators, their swords ringing against the stone walls in the narrow confines. The defensive line was collapsing from multiple directions. Above them, the sounds of breaking wood grew louder. Someone shouted. Marcus couldn't tell if it was Prince Adrian or one of his guards, but the voice carried pain and desperation. The prince was fighting for his life, and Marcus was trapped between enemies with no way to help. Time's up, Marcus, Sterling announced. Surrender now, and I'll make sure your death is quick. Continue to resist, and I'll let my men take their time with you. Marcus looked at the faces of his remaining men. Donovan's jaw was set with grim determination. Whitmore clutched her sword with white knuckles but showed no sign of fear. Fletcher and his companions continued their desperate fight in the passage behind them, refusing to yield even against overwhelming odds. These were the kind of people James Sterling had died defending. Loyal, brave, willing to sacrifice themselves for something greater than their own lives. How could his father not see that they represented the best of what Valdemar could be? I have a counter-offer, Marcus called back to Sterling. Go to hell. Sterling's response was to signal his men forward. The corridor erupted in violence as trained killers charged down the stairs, their weapons gleaming in the torchlight. Marcus met the first attacker with his sword, the clash of steel on steel echoing through the confined space. The fighting was brutal and desperate. In the narrow corridor, there was no room for fancy swordwork or elaborate tactics, just raw skill, determination, and the will to survive. Marcus found himself facing 2 opponents at once, his blade moving in patterns drilled into his muscle memory through years of training. Sergeant Donovan fought like a man possessed, his loyalty to the crown giving him strength beyond his physical limitations. Corporal Whitmore proved that her small stature meant nothing when backed by absolute conviction, her quick reflexes allowing her to dodge attacks that would have killed larger opponents. But they were outnumbered, and Marcus knew they couldn't hold the line much longer. Sterling's men were pressing forward relentlessly, using their numerical advantage to wear down the defenders. Soon, the corridor would be overrun, and Prince Adrian would be defenseless. Then Marcus heard something that changed everything. The sound of a war horn echoing through the palace corridors. It was answered by another horn from a different direction, then another. The royal recall signal was being sounded throughout the palace, calling all loyal guards to rally to predetermined positions. Someone had taken command of the situation and was organizing a coordinated response to the conspiracy. But who? Who could have the authority and knowledge necessary to coordinate palace defenses on this scale? The answer came in the form of a voice that cut through the sounds of combat like a sword through silk. In the name of King Edmund of Valdemar, lay down your weapons. The voice belonged to Commander Sarah Blackthorne of the Shadow Guard, and she was not alone. The staircase behind Sterling suddenly filled with armed figures in the distinctive black leather of the legendary elite unit. The conspirators found themselves caught between 2 forces, their advantage in numbers suddenly reversed. Sterling's face went white as he recognized the uniform of the Shadow Guard. Like most people, he had probably believed they were nothing more than stories told to frighten children. Finding himself facing their reality was clearly a shock that he hadn't prepared for. "Impossible," he breathed. "The Shadow Guard is a myth." "Tell that to your dead accomplices," Commander Blackthorne replied coldly. "We've been watching this conspiracy unfold for months. Did you really think we would allow you to destroy the kingdom we've spent our lives protecting?" The tide of battle turned in seconds. Sterling's men, caught between the Shadow Guard and Marcus's defenders, found themselves fighting on two fronts with no hope of victory. Some threw down their weapons immediately, while others fought on with the desperation of men who knew they faced execution for treason. Sterling himself backed against the wall, his sword still in his hand but his eyes darting frantically for some escape route. Marcus approached him slowly, his own blade steady despite the exhaustion that was beginning to set in. "It's over, Robert," Marcus said quietly, using Sterling's first name for the first time in years. "The conspiracy is finished. Surrender and maybe the king will show mercy." "Mercy?" Sterling laughed bitterly. "From Edmund the Weak? I'd rather die fighting than spend the rest of my life in his dungeons." But even as he spoke, the fight seemed to go out of him. His shoulders sagged, and for a moment he looked like the broken man he truly was, a father who had lost his son and let grief poison his soul. "James would be ashamed of you," Marcus said, and he meant it kindly. "But it's not too late to honor his memory properly." Sterling looked at him for a long moment, then slowly lowered his sword. "Perhaps," he said quietly. "Perhaps you're right." As the Shadow Guard secured the remaining conspirators, Commander Blackthorne approached Marcus. Her face was grim despite the victory. "Captain Blackwood, I need to inform you that Prince Adrian has been injured in the fighting upstairs. He's alive, but he needs medical attention immediately." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. "How badly injured?" "A sword cut to his left arm and some bruises, nothing life-threatening." But the psychological impact of tonight's events, she shook her head. Learning that men he trusted with his life were trying to kill him, that's going to leave scars that won't heal as easily as physical wounds. As they climbed the stairs toward Prince Adrian's location, Marcus found himself thinking about the broader implications of the night's events. Yes, the immediate conspiracy had been defeated, but at what cost? The trust that held the kingdom together had been shattered. The very foundations of royal security had been shown to be compromised. They found Prince Adrian in his temporary quarters, being tended by the palace physician. The prince looked pale and shaken, but his eyes were clear and determined. When he saw Marcus, he managed a weak smile. "Captain Blackwood," Adrian said, "I hear you've had an eventful evening." "Not as eventful as yours, Your Highness," Marcus replied. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've learned more about human nature tonight than I wanted to know," Adrian answered honestly. "But I'm alive, and the kingdom survives. That's what matters." Commander Blackthorne stepped forward. "Your Highness, we've captured most of the conspirators, but we need to discuss the broader implications of what we've uncovered. This conspiracy reached into every level of the palace hierarchy." Prince Adrian nodded wearily. "I know. We're going to have to rebuild everything, the guard structure, the advisory council, the very way we think about palace security. It will take years, but it can be done," Marcus said firmly. "Tonight proved that there are still people willing to die for what's right. We just need to be better at recognizing who they are." As dawn broke fully over the palace of Valdemar, Marcus looked out at the gardens below. The kingdom faced an uncertain future, full of challenges and hard decisions. Trust would have to be rebuilt slowly, carefully, one relationship at a time. But they had survived the night, and sometimes survival was enough to build hope upon. The palace had changed forever, but perhaps, with time and effort, it could become something stronger than it had been before. The first rays of dawn painted the palace walls in shades of gold and crimson, but Marcus found no beauty in the sunrise. From his position at the window of Prince Adrian's temporary quarters, he could see smoke rising from multiple points throughout the capital city of Aldara. What had begun as a palace conspiracy was revealing itself to be something far more sinister and widespread. "Captain Blackwood," Commander Blackthorne called urgently from across the room. "You need to hear this." Marcus turned to see the Shadow Guard commander standing over a captured conspirator who had finally agreed to talk. The man was one of Sterling's lieutenants, a scarred veteran named Walsh who had served in the Royal Guard for 8 years before his loyalty had been corrupted. "Tell the captain what you told me," Blackthorne ordered. Walsh looked up with haunted eyes, blood trickling from a cut on his cheek. "The palace operation was just the beginning. he said hoarsely. While we were creating chaos here, Duke Aldrich's army was supposed to cross the northern border. The plan was to eliminate the royal family, then present Aldrich as the rightful successor when he arrived to restore order to the kingdom. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Duke Aldrich of Blackmoor was King Edmund's cousin, a man who had been exiled 15 years ago for attempting to claim the throne through forged documents. If Aldrich was involved, this wasn't just a conspiracy. It was a full-scale invasion, masked as a succession dispute. Prince Adrian, who had been listening from his chair while the physician finished bandaging his wounded arm, stood up with grim determination. "How large is Aldrich's army?" 3,000 men, Your Highness, Walsh replied. "Professional soldiers, not the peasant militia we might expect from a minor duke. They've been training in secret camps across the border for years, waiting for this moment." The implications were staggering. While the palace had been focused on internal threats, an entire army had been preparing to invade. The conspiracy had been designed not just to eliminate the royal family, but to paralyze the kingdom's defenses while foreign soldiers marched on the capital. Commander Blackthorne moved to the window and studied the smoke rising from the city below. "Those fires aren't random," she observed. "They're targeting specific buildings, the armory, the garrison headquarters, the communication towers. Someone is systematically destroying our ability to organize a defense." Prince Adrian joined her at the window, his face pale but resolute. "How many loyal troops do we have available?" "Maybe 500 within the city," Blackthorne replied. "Another 1,000 scattered throughout the kingdom. But it would take days to gather them. Against 3,000 professional soldiers, our chances are." She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Marcus stepped forward. "Your Highness, we need to evacuate you from the palace immediately. If Duke Aldrich's army is approaching, this position will be impossible to defend." But Prince Adrian shook his head firmly. "I won't run while my people are under attack. If Aldrich wants to claim the throne, he'll have to do it over my dead body." "That can be arranged," a new voice said from the doorway. Everyone in the room spun around to see a figure that none of them had expected. Duke Aldrich himself, flanked by 6 soldiers in the black and silver armor of Blackmoor. The Duke was a tall, imposing man with graying hair and cold blue eyes that held no warmth or mercy. He carried himself with the arrogance of someone who believed victory was already assured. "Uncle," Prince Adrian said quietly, using the family title despite the circumstances. "I thought you were leading your army across the border." "My army is already here," Aldrich replied with a cruel smile. "They entered the city 3 hours ago through the old sewage tunnels, guided by maps provided by our friends in the palace. Your loyal guards are fighting bravely, but they're outnumbered and surrounded. It's only a matter of time." Marcus's hand moved to his sword, but he hesitated when he saw that Aldrich's soldiers had crossbows trained on Prince Adrian. One wrong move, and the heir to the throne would die instantly. "How did you get past our security?" Commander Blackthorne demanded. "The same way I've been getting information about palace defenses for 3 years," Aldrich answered. "Through loyal servants who understood that Valdemar needed stronger leadership than my weak-willed brother could provide." Prince Adrian stepped forward, his chin raised defiantly. "The people of Valdemar would never accept a usurper on the throne. You might be able to take the palace by force, but you'll never rule legitimately." "Oh, but I won't be a usurper," Aldrich said, reaching into his coat to withdraw a rolled parchment sealed with royal wax. "This is a signed confession by your father, admitting to incompetence and formally abdicating in favor of his more capable brother. Very touching, really. His final act as king was to put the kingdom's needs above his own pride." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. "Where is His Majesty?" "Safe," Aldrich replied, though his smile suggested otherwise. "He and my dear sister-in-law are being held in a comfortable location while they consider the wisdom of cooperation. Their safety depends entirely on how reasonable their son chooses to be." The Duke unrolled the parchment and held it up for everyone to see. King Edmund's signature was clearly visible at the bottom, along with the royal seal. If the document was genuine, it would provide legal justification for Aldrich's claim to the throne. "Even if that signature is real," Prince Adrian said steadily, "abdication under duress is not legally binding. The people will see through your charade." "Perhaps," Aldrich conceded, "but by the time anyone questions the legality, I'll have been ruling for months. Possession, as they say, is 9/10 of the law. And possession requires eliminating all alternative claimants to the throne." He nodded to his soldiers, and Marcus tensed for the fight of his life. But before anyone could move, a tremendous crash echoed through the palace. followed by shouting and the sound of running feet. Through the window, Marcus could see fire beginning to spread through the lower levels of the building. "Ah," Aldrich said with satisfaction. "That would be my men setting charges in the foundation. This conversation has been enlightening, but I'm afraid we're running short on time. The palace will be completely ablaze within minutes." Commander Blackthorne stepped closer to Prince Adrian, her hand on her sword hilt. "Your Highness, we need to move now." "Indeed you do," Aldrich agreed, "but there's nowhere to run. My soldiers control every exit from this tower. Your only choice is between burning alive or facing my justice." Marcus looked around the room desperately, searching for any option that might save Prince Adrian's life. The window was too high for escape, the door was blocked by enemies, and the secret passages would likely be filled with smoke from the fires below. Then he remembered something from his early days in the palace, a detail from the building's construction that most people had forgotten. This tower had been built as a defensive position during the castle's original construction 3 centuries ago. Like many medieval towers, it had been designed with a final desperate escape route. "Your Highness," Marcus said quietly, moving to the corner of the room where an ancient tapestry hung on the wall. "Remember the stories about King Marcus the Bold and how he escaped from this very tower during the siege of 1342? Prince Adrian's eyes widened with understanding. The stories weren't just legends. They were historical accounts of a real escape route that few people knew still existed. Marcus grabbed the tapestry and pulled it aside, revealing a narrow opening in the stone wall that had been sealed with a thin layer of mortar. The mortar was old and cracked, weakened by centuries of exposure to moisture and temperature changes. "Stop them!" Aldrich shouted, realizing what was happening. Marcus threw himself at the wall, using his shoulder and all his weight to break through the weakened mortar. The seal gave way with a crash of falling stone, revealing a narrow shaft that led down into darkness. Commander Blackthorne immediately understood the plan. She grabbed Prince Adrian's good arm and propelled him toward the opening. "Go! We'll hold them off." The crossbow bolts began flying as Prince Adrian disappeared into the shaft. Marcus followed him immediately, while Commander Blackthorne and the remaining loyal guards formed a desperate rearguard action to buy them time. The shaft was barely wide enough for a man's shoulders, and the rough stone walls scraped against Marcus's armor as he descended. Above them, he could hear the sounds of furious combat as Blackthorne fought against overwhelming odds. The brave commander was sacrificing herself to give her prince a chance at escape. The shaft opened into a natural cave system that ran beneath the palace foundations. Prince Adrian was waiting at the bottom, his face grim with determination and grief. "Commander Blackthorne?" he asked. "She stayed behind to give us time," Marcus replied. "Your Highness, she died for you. We can't let her sacrifice be meaningless." Prince Adrian nodded, his jaw set with new resolve. "Then we make sure Duke Aldrich never sits on the throne of Valdemar." "Where does this cave system lead?" Marcus tried to remember the old maps he had studied during his training. "If my memory is correct, these tunnels connect to the old Roman sewers that run under the city. We might be able to reach the harbor district without being detected." As they began moving through the dark tunnels, the sound of distant explosions echoed through the stone around them. Duke Aldrich was making good on his threat to burn the palace to the ground, destroying centuries of history and culture in his quest for power. "The people need to know the truth," Prince Adrian said as they navigated the treacherous underground passages. "They need to understand that this invasion isn't a legitimate succession. It's foreign conquest disguised as civil war." Marcus nodded, though he wondered how they could possibly spread that message when Aldrich's forces controlled the city. Every official communication channel would be monitored or destroyed. Every known resistance leader would be hunted down and eliminated. But as they emerged from the tunnel system into a drainage canal near the harbor, Marcus saw something that gave him hope. Despite the early hour, crowds of people were gathering in the streets. Word of the palace attack was already spreading, and the citizens of Aldara were beginning to understand that their kingdom was under assault. "Look," Prince Adrian said, pointing to a group of dock workers who were arguing with soldiers in Blackmore armor. "The people aren't accepting Aldrich's authority. They know something is wrong." As they watched, the confrontation escalated into violence. The dock workers, despite being outnumbered and outarmed, fought back against the foreign soldiers with improvised weapons and raw determination. Similar scenes were playing out throughout the visible portions of the city. "The invasion might have succeeded militarily," Marcus observed, "but Aldrich has underestimated the spirit of our people. They won't accept foreign rule quietly." Prince Adrian's eyes gleamed with new hope. "Then we give them something to rally around. We organize a resistance, and we take our kingdom back. The young prince who had nearly died in the palace had been transformed by the night's events. Gone was the sheltered royal who had lived within the protection of palace walls. In his place stood a future king who understood the true cost of leadership and was prepared to fight for his people's freedom. As the sun rose higher over the burning palace, Marcus knew that the real war for Valdemar's soul was just beginning. Duke Aldrich might have won the first battle through treachery and surprise, but the kingdom's people would not surrender their independence without a fight. The palace had changed forever, but from its ashes would rise something stronger, a kingdom united not by blind loyalty to tradition, but by conscious choice to defend freedom against tyranny. Prince Adrian turned to Marcus with determination burning in his eyes. "Captain, are you ready to help me take back our kingdom?" Marcus smiled and placed his hand on his sword hilt. "Until my dying breath, your highness." Behind them, the palace continued to burn, but ahead lay the harbor and the ships that could carry them to safety. From there, they would begin the long process of gathering allies and building a resistance movement that would ultimately drive the invaders from Valdemar's soil. The darkest hour had passed. Now came the time for hope and renewal. As they made their way through the drainage system toward the harbor, Prince Adrian and Marcus encountered other survivors of the palace assault. A group of kitchen servants had escaped through the service tunnels, and 3 members of the royal guard had fought their way out through sheer determination and superior knowledge of the building's layout. Among the survivors was Elena Vasquez, the head of the palace library, a middle-aged woman whose calm demeanor and sharp intelligence had made her one of Prince Adrian's most trusted advisors. She carried with her a leather satchel that she clutched protectively against her chest. "Your Highness," she said when she recognized the prince in the dim light of the tunnels. "Thank the gods you escaped. I managed to save these before the fires reached the library." She opened the satchel to reveal several crucial documents: genealogical records proving the legitimate royal bloodline, legal texts defining succession law, and most importantly, correspondence that revealed the full scope of Duke Aldrich's conspiracy. The letters showed evidence of coordination with foreign powers, payments to corrupt officials, and detailed plans for the systematic elimination of anyone who might oppose the usurpation. "This evidence could be invaluable," Prince Adrian said, examining the documents by the light of a small torch that one of the guards carried. "But only if we can survive long enough to use it." Their progress through the tunnels was slow and dangerous. The ancient stonework was crumbling in places, and the air grew increasingly foul as they moved deeper into the city's underground. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of pursuit. Duke Aldrich had realized their escape route and sent soldiers to hunt them down. The group reached a junction where 3 tunnels branched off in different directions. Marcus studied the options, trying to remember the layout of the underground systems from his security training. "The left tunnel leads toward the merchant district," he explained quietly. "The center goes to the cathedral quarter, and the right connects to the harbor through the old Roman aqueduct system." "Which route would Aldrich's men expect us to take?" Prince Adrian asked. "The harbor route," Marcus replied. "It's the most obvious escape path. Ships could take us out of the kingdom to safety." "Then we don't take it," the prince decided. "Eleanor, you and half the group go right toward the harbor. Make enough noise to draw attention, but don't engage in any fights you can avoid. The rest of us will take the left tunnel toward the merchant district." Elena looked puzzled. "Your Highness, with respect, the merchant district will be heavily patrolled. What advantage could we gain there?" Prince Adrian's eyes gleamed with the beginning of a plan. "The merchants have the most to lose from foreign occupation. Their trade agreements, their property rights, their entire way of life depends on Valdemar's independence. If we can rally them to our cause, we'll have the foundation for a real resistance movement." Marcus nodded approvingly. It was a risky plan, but it showed strategic thinking. A prince who simply fled to safety would be powerless to help his people. One who stayed to fight, however, could become the nucleus around which opposition to the invasion could form. The group split as planned, with Elena leading the decoy team toward the harbor. Prince Adrian, Marcus, and 3 guards moved carefully through the left tunnel, guided by the faint sound of voices echoing down from the street level above. When they finally emerged from a concealed grate in an alley behind the Silversmiths Guild, the full extent of the invasion became clear. Foreign soldiers patrolled every major street, their distinctive black and silver armor marking them as professional troops rather than the local militia. Bodies of both soldiers and civilians lay scattered throughout the visible areas, testament to the fierce resistance that the people of Aldara had mounted. But the resistance was clearly failing. The invaders had superior numbers, better equipment, and the advantage of surprise. Most of the organized defense had been neutralized in the first hours of the attack. leaving only scattered pockets of civilians fighting with makeshift weapons and raw courage. "We need to reach Guildmaster Thornton," Prince Adrian said, pointing to the Silversmiths Guild Hall across the square. "He's influential enough to speak for the entire merchant community. Getting across the square without being detected would require careful timing and no small amount of luck." Marcus studied the patrol patterns of the enemy soldiers, looking for gaps in their coverage. "There," he said, pointing to a narrow window of opportunity. "When the next patrol passes, we'll have about 90 seconds to reach the guild hall before the following group arrives." They waited in tense silence until the patrol moved past their hiding place. Then Marcus led a swift sprint across the open space, keeping low and moving from shadow to shadow. Prince Adrian followed closely, his injured arm hampering his movement but not slowing his determination. They reached the guild hall just as the sound of approaching boots announced the arrival of the next patrol. Marcus pounded on the heavy wooden door, using a specific pattern that identified him as a member of the Royal Guard. The door opened to reveal Guildmaster Edmund Thornton, a stocky man with greying hair and hands stained by decades of working with precious metals. His eyes widened in shock when he recognized Prince Adrian. "Your Highness? We heard that the royal family had been—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Murdered?" Prince Adrian supplied. "Not yet, though my uncle is certainly trying. Master Thornton, I need your help." Thornton quickly ushered them into the guild hall, where they found nearly 50 merchants and craftsmen who had taken refuge from the fighting. The hall buzzed with anxious conversation and fearful speculation about the future of their businesses under foreign occupation. When Prince Adrian stepped into the main chamber, a hush fell over the assembled merchants. Many of them had known him since childhood, had watched him grow from a curious boy who asked endless questions about their crafts into a thoughtful young man who understood the vital role that trade played in the kingdom's prosperity. "My friends," Prince Adrian began, his voice carrying clearly through the large room, "I won't lie to you about our situation. Duke Aldrich has seized the palace. My parents are his prisoners, and foreign soldiers control much of the city. By any conventional measure, his coup has succeeded." Worried murmurs rose from the crowd, but the prince raised his hand for silence. "However," he continued, "Aldrich has made a crucial mistake. He believes that controlling buildings and capturing officials is the same as ruling a kingdom. But we know better. Valdemar isn't just stone and mortar. It's the people who call it home, the traditions that bind us together, and the shared commitment to freedom and prosperity that has made our kingdom strong." Master Thornton stepped forward, his voice gruff with emotion. "What do you need from us, Your Highness?" "I need you to help me prove that Valdemar isn't dead," Prince Adrian replied. "I need you to help me show our people that resistance is possible, that hope still exists, and I need you to help me build a movement that will eventually drive these invaders from our soil." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Merchants who had seemed defeated moments before straightened their shoulders and looked at their prince with renewed hope. These were people who had built their fortunes through determination and hard work, and they understood that defending their freedom would require the same qualities. "The guild halls throughout the city are connected by underground passages," Master Thornton explained. "We built them years ago to move valuable goods safely during times of civil unrest. They could serve as communication networks for resistance activities." Another merchant, a woman named Sarah Goldsmith who specialized in jewelry, spoke up. "Many of us have contacts in other kingdoms. We could get word out about what's really happening here, counter whatever propaganda Aldrich is spreading." A younger man named David Ironwright, whose family had been making weapons for 3 generations, added, "We have stocks of weapons and armor in our workshops, not military-grade equipment, but enough to arm civilians who want to fight." Marcus watched with growing amazement as the merchants transformed from frightened refugees into determined resistance fighters. Prince Adrian had tapped into something powerful, the fierce independence that had made Valdemar's merchant class the envy of neighboring kingdoms. But their planning was interrupted by shouts from the street outside. Through the hall's tall windows, they could see a commotion developing in the square. Duke Aldrich himself had arrived, accompanied by a full company of soldiers and several prisoners. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice when he recognized the prisoners. King Edmund and Queen Isabella were bound and gagged, forced to kneel in the center of the square, while Aldrich's men erected a platform that could only serve one purpose: public execution. "He's going to kill them in front of the people," Prince Adrian said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's going to make their deaths a spectacle to break our people's spirit." The merchants around them fell silent as they grasped the implications. Witnessing the execution of the beloved king and queen would devastate the population's morale and make resistance seem hopeless. "We have to do something," Master Thornton said urgently. "Your Highness, we can't let this happen." Prince Adrian moved to the window and studied the scene outside. Aldrich's soldiers were positioned professionally, with clear fields of fire and overlapping coverage. Any direct assault would be suicide, resulting in the deaths of the rescue party without saving the king and queen. But Marcus could see that the prince was thinking, calculating odds and possibilities with the same strategic mind that had enabled him to uncover the original conspiracy. "Master Thornton," Prince Adrian said suddenly, "does your guild hall have access to the bell tower of St. Michael's Cathedral?" "Yes, through the connecting passages. But Your Highness, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that sometimes the best way to save lives is to give people something worth living for," the prince replied. "Marcus, how many of our guards do we have here?" "3, plus myself," Marcus answered. "Not nearly enough for a direct assault." "Then we don't assault directly," Prince Adrian said. "We do something that Aldrich won't expect. We turn his propaganda against him."
The prince quickly outlined his plan, and Marcus felt a surge of admiration for the young man's tactical thinking.
It was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but it was also brilliant. If it worked, it could transform Aldrich's moment of triumph into the spark that ignited a kingdom-wide rebellion. If it failed, they would all die alongside the king and queen. But sometimes, Marcus reflected, the risk was worth taking, when the alternative was surrendering everything worth defending. "Your Highness," he said formally, "the plan is insane." Prince Adrian smiled grimly. "Thank you, Captain. I'll take that as a compliment." As they prepared for what might be their final act of defiance, Marcus found himself thinking about the events that had brought them to this moment. The palace conspiracy, the betrayals, the revelations about human nature, all of it had led to this square, this moment, this choice between submission and resistance. The palace had changed forever, but perhaps change wasn't always a loss. Perhaps sometimes it was the beginning of something better than what had come before. Outside, Duke Aldrich was beginning his speech to the assembled crowd, confident in his victory and certain that the execution of the royal couple would seal his claim to the throne. He was about to learn that he had seriously underestimated the prince he had tried so hard to kill. The ancient stones of St. Michael's Cathedral bell tower had witnessed many historic moments over the centuries, but none quite like this. Prince Adrian crouched beside the massive bronze bell, his heart pounding as he prepared for the most important speech of his life. Through the arched windows he could see Duke Aldrich's execution platform in the square below, surrounded by hundreds of his people who had been forced to witness what they believed would be their king's final moments. Marcus positioned himself at the tower's other window, a crossbow in his hands and a look of grim determination on his face. The plan was simple in concept, but would require perfect timing and no small amount of divine intervention to succeed. "Remember," Prince Adrian said quietly to the 3 merchants who had volunteered to help, "wait for my signal. When I give the word, ring every bell in the cathedral as loudly as possible. The sound needs to carry throughout the entire city." Master Thornton nodded, his weathered hands gripping the bell rope. "Your Highness, even if this works, you'll be exposing yourself to enemy fire. They'll know exactly where you are." "That's the point," Prince Adrian replied. "The people need to see that their prince hasn't abandoned them. They need to know that resistance is possible." Below in the square, Duke Aldrich was reaching the climax of his prepared speech. That, he stood on the platform in elaborate royal robes that he had no right to wear, proclaiming himself the rightful king of Valdemar and condemning Edmund and Isabella as traitors who had endangered the kingdom through their weakness. The crowd's response was not what Aldrich had expected. Instead of cheering his ascension, the people stood in sullen silence. Many wept openly at seeing their beloved monarchs bound and humiliated. Others watched with barely concealed anger that grew stronger with each word of Aldrich's propaganda. "These so-called rulers," Aldrich declared, his voice carrying across the square, "have allowed our enemies to threaten our borders while they lived in luxury within their palace walls. They have failed in their most sacred duty to protect the people they were sworn to serve. It was a lie, and everyone present knew it." King Edmund's reign had been marked by peace, prosperity, and careful diplomacy that had avoided costly wars. But Aldrich clearly believed that if he repeated his falsehoods loudly enough, some people might begin to accept them. Prince Adrian had heard enough. He rose from his concealment and stepped into view at the bell tower window, raising his voice to carry across the square. The only failure here is your own, uncle. The effect was electric. Every head in the square turned toward the bell tower, and gasps of amazement rippled through the crowd as they recognized their prince. Duke Aldrich's face went white with shock. According to his intelligence, Prince Adrian should have been dead hours ago. "My people," Prince Adrian called out, his voice strong and clear despite the distance, "do not be deceived by this pretender's lies. The man who claims to be your rightful king is nothing more than a foreign invader who has brought enemy soldiers onto our soil to murder your true rulers." Aldrich recovered quickly from his surprise and began shouting orders to his men. Crossbowmen turned their weapons toward the bell tower while others began moving toward the cathedral to capture or kill the prince. But Prince Adrian wasn't finished speaking. "Look around you. See the foreign soldiers who patrol our streets, who have burned our palace, who hold weapons to the throats of innocent civilians. This is not a legitimate succession. This is conquest disguised as civil law." Master Thornton had been watching for his cue. Now he pulled on the bell rope with all his strength, and the great bronze bell of St. Michael's Cathedral began to toll. The deep, resonant sound echoed across the city, joined moments later by the bells of every other church and guild hall as the signal spread through the underground network of loyal citizens. The sound was more than just noise. It was a call to action that had been used for centuries to rally Valdemar's people in times of crisis. Every citizen understood its meaning. The kingdom was in mortal danger, and all who loved freedom were called to defend it. Duke Aldrich's carefully orchestrated execution was descending into chaos. His soldiers found themselves facing not a cowed population, but an increasingly angry crowd that was beginning to realize they outnumbered their oppressors. The bells continued to ring, and with each toll, more people seemed to remember their strength and their heritage. "Citizens of Valdemar," Prince Adrian continued, having to shout now to be heard over the bells. "Your prince has not fled. Your royal family has not surrendered. We call upon you now to reclaim your birthright, to drive these invaders from our soil and restore the freedom that is your inheritance." The first crossbow bolt shattered stone inches from Prince Adrian's head, but he didn't flinch. Marcus returned fire from his position, his bolt taking down the archer with deadly precision. More soldiers were rushing toward the cathedral, but they had to fight their way through crowds of increasingly hostile civilians. In the square below, the people were no longer passive observers. They began moving toward the execution platform, their voices raised in anger and defiance. Duke Aldrich's guards tried to maintain their formation, but they were vastly outnumbered and found themselves facing improvised weapons wielded by people fighting for their homeland. "Seize him!" Aldrich screamed, pointing at the bell tower. "1,000 gold pieces to the man who brings me the prince's head." But his soldiers were discovering that controlling an armed enemy and subduing an entire population were very different challenges. For every civilian they struck down, 2 more seemed to take their place. The carefully planned coup was collapsing into urban warfare that strongly favored the defenders. Marcus tapped Prince Adrian on the shoulder. "Your Highness, we need to move. They're surrounding the cathedral." Prince Adrian nodded and gave one final shout to his people. "Remember, you are not just subjects of the crown. You are citizens of Valdemar, and this is your kingdom. Fight for it." Then they were racing down the narrow stone steps of the bell tower, their footsteps echoing in the ancient stonework. Behind them, they could hear enemy soldiers breaking into the cathedral, but the prince's words had already done their work. The sound of fighting was spreading throughout the city as the people rose in rebellion against their occupiers. The escape route that Master Thornton had prepared led through the cathedral's crypt and into the network of tunnels that connected the guild halls. As they ran through the dark passages, they could hear the sounds of battle echoing from above, shouting voices, clashing weapons, and the steady tolling of bells calling more and more citizens to join the fight. They emerged in the basement of the Blacksmith's Guild, where David Ironright was waiting with weapons and armor for anyone brave enough to join the resistance. The young man's face was grim but determined as he handed Prince Adrian a sword and mail shirt. "Your Highness," David reported, "the word is spreading faster than wildfire. Every guild hall in the city is arming its members. The dockworkers have seized 3 of Aldrich's supply ships, and the farmers outside the city walls are blocking the roads to prevent reinforcements from reaching his army." Prince Adrian strapped on the mail shirt and tested the weight of the sword. It felt strange to be preparing for battle in a blacksmith's basement rather than the palace armory, but these were strange times that called for adaptation. "What about my parents?" he asked urgently. "Still prisoners in the square, but Aldrich's men are having trouble maintaining control of the platform," Marcus reported. The crowd is getting bolder, and his guards are being forced to fight on multiple fronts. Prince Adrian made a decision that would have seemed impossible a day earlier. Then we go get them. Marcus, gather every loyal guard you can find. Master Thornton, can your people create a distraction on the east side of the square? Consider it done, Your Highness. The guildmaster replied with a fierce grin. We've been wanting to pay back those foreign bastards for what they've done to our city. The next 20 minutes were a blur of preparation and coordination. Using the network of guild tunnels, Prince Adrian's growing force of resistance fighters positioned themselves around the square. They were still outnumbered, but they had the advantage of knowing the terrain and fighting for their homes. The attack began when Master Thornton's merchants launched their distraction, a coordinated assault on the enemy supply depot that drew a significant portion of Duke Aldrich's forces away from the execution platform. At the same moment, Prince Adrian led a direct charge from the cathedral, his sword gleaming in the afternoon sun as he fought his way toward his parents. The battle in the square was fierce and chaotic. Duke Aldrich's professional soldiers were skilled and disciplined, but they were fighting an entire population that had finally realized its own strength. Civilians who had never held weapons before wielded hammers and farming tools with desperate courage, while experienced guards and former soldiers provided tactical leadership. Marcus fought beside his prince with the skill and determination of a man defending everything he held sacred. His sword cut through enemy ranks as he cleared a path toward the execution platform, where King Edmund and Queen Isabella waited with dignity even in the face of death. Duke Aldrich himself stood atop the platform, his own sword drawn as he realized that his carefully planned coup was collapsing around him. When he saw Prince Adrian approaching, his face twisted with rage and desperation. "You should be dead," he snarled, raising his weapon. "Everything I've worked for, everything I've sacrificed, you're going to destroy it all just like your weak father." "I'm going to save it," Prince Adrian replied calmly as he climbed onto the platform. "I'm going to save the kingdom you were trying to destroy."
The duel between nephew and uncle was brief but intense.
Aldrich fought with the skill of a veteran warrior and the fury of a man who saw his life's ambition crumbling before his eyes. But Prince Adrian fought with something more powerful, the strength that comes from defending everything you love. The end came when Aldrich, in his desperation, left himself open for a killing blow. Prince Adrian's sword found its target, and the pretender to the throne of Voldemar fell to the wooden platform, his dreams of conquest dying with him. As the sounds of battle began to fade throughout the city, Prince Adrian cut his parents' bonds with his own hands. King Edmund and Queen Isabella were weak from their ordeal, but alive and essentially unharmed. The reunion was emotional but brief. There was still work to be done to secure the kingdom's freedom. The aftermath of Duke Aldrich's failed invasion revealed the full scope of the conspiracy that had threatened to destroy Voldemar. Investigation of captured documents showed connections to enemy kingdoms that had been planning to partition the realm among themselves. The palace conspiracy had been only one part of a much larger plot to eliminate Valdemar as an independent nation. But the invasion's failure had accomplished something that years of peaceful rule could not. It had united the kingdom's people in a shared understanding of what their freedom was worth. Citizens who had taken their liberty for granted now knew the price of defending it. In the weeks that followed, as the palace was rebuilt and the government reorganized, fundamental changes were made to prevent future conspiracies. The Royal Guard was restructured with new accountability measures and regular loyalty assessments. The Shadow Guard, no longer a secret organization, was formally recognized and given expanded authority to investigate threats to the crown. Most importantly, the people themselves had been transformed. They had learned that they were not passive subjects dependent on their rulers for protection, but active citizens with the power and responsibility to defend their own freedom. Prince Adrian, who had begun the crisis as a sheltered young royal, had emerged as a true leader who understood both the weight of the crown and the strength of the people he would someday rule. The trials he had endured had forged him into the kind of king that Valdemar would need in the challenging years ahead. Marcus was promoted to Captain General of the Royal Guard and tasked with implementing the new security measures. But more than his rank had changed, his faith in the possibility of justice had been restored by witnessing ordinary people perform extraordinary acts of courage. Commander Sarah Blackthorne, who had survived the battle in the tower against impossible odds, was given overall command of the kingdom's intelligence services. Her Shadow Guard would continue to protect the realm from hidden threats, but they would do so with the knowledge that the ultimate strength of any kingdom lay not in its secrets, but in the courage of its people. The palace of Valdemar was indeed changed forever by the events of that terrible night and triumphant day. But it was changed for the better, transformed from a symbol of isolated royal power into the heart of a kingdom where rulers and citizens worked together to protect their shared values. As Prince Adrian stood at the window of his rebuilt chambers, looking out over the city where so many had fought and died for freedom, he reflected on the lessons he had learned. Trust, once broken, could be rebuilt stronger than before. Leadership meant serving others, not commanding them. And the true strength of any kingdom came not from its palaces or its armies, but from the character of its people. The palace walls had been rebuilt with stone, but the kingdom itself had been rebuilt with something far more durable: the unshakable conviction that freedom was worth any sacrifice necessary to preserve it. Marcus joined him at the window, his weathered face peaceful for the first time in months. "Any regrets, Your Highness?" the captain asked. Prince Adrian smiled, thinking of all the changes that had transformed not just the palace but the very soul of the kingdom. "None whatsoever, my friend. None whatsoever." Outside, the bells of Valdemar rang once again, not in alarm this time, but in celebration of a kingdom reborn and a people who had rediscovered their strength. The palace had changed forever, and that change had made it the heart of something better than it had ever been before. As the months passed and the full extent of the transformation became clear, visitors to the palace often remarked on how different it felt from the isolated fortress it had once been. The new design incorporated public galleries where citizens could observe court proceedings, and regular audiences where any subject could petition the crown directly. The walls that had once separated the rulers from the ruled had been replaced with spaces that brought them together. King Edmund, though physically recovered from his ordeal, had been deeply affected by the betrayal of men he had trusted with his life. He began to delegate more responsibilities to Prince Adrian, recognizing that his son had been forged by crisis into the kind of leader the kingdom needed. The transition of power was gradual and natural, guided by wisdom earned through shared suffering. Queen Isabella threw herself into relief efforts for the families of those who had died defending the kingdom. Her work brought her into daily contact with ordinary citizens, and she became a beloved figure who embodied the crown's commitment to serving the people rather than ruling over them. The merchants who had formed the backbone of the resistance found their influence in government greatly expanded. Guildmaster Thornton was appointed to a new position, Minister of Civic Defense, responsible for maintaining the network of civilian defenders that had proven so crucial during the invasion. His appointment sent a clear message that loyalty and courage mattered more than noble birth in the new Valdemar. David Ironwright, the young blacksmith who had armed the resistance, was commissioned to design and build new defensive installations throughout the kingdom. His workshops became centers of innovation, developing new weapons and techniques that would ensure Valdemar was never again caught unprepared for invasion. Elena Vasquez, who had saved the crucial documents proving Duke Aldrich's treachery, was appointed as the kingdom's first Minister of Truth and Reconciliation. Her job was to ensure that the full history of the conspiracy was documented and remembered, so that future generations would understand the price of freedom and the importance of vigilance. The trials of the surviving conspirators were conducted in public, with full transparency about their crimes and motivations. Some, like Commander Sterling, were men who had allowed grief and disillusionment to poison their loyalty. They received sentences of exile rather than execution, with the understanding that they could return if they truly repented their actions. Others, like Lord Caster's remaining network, had been motivated purely by greed and ambition. Their trials revealed the full scope of their thievery and corruption, and they faced the full penalty of the law. But even these proceedings were conducted with careful attention to justice and due process, demonstrating that Valdemar's new strength was built on law rather than vengeance. The international implications of Duke Aldrich's failed invasion were far-reaching. The neighboring kingdoms that had planned to partition Valdemar found themselves facing a united, militarily prepared nation that had proven its ability to defend itself. Trade relationships were renegotiated on more favorable terms, and Valdemar emerged from the crisis as a more respected and influential regional power. But perhaps the most important changes were the ones that couldn't be measured in treaties or military strength. The kingdom had developed what scholars would later call a civic spirit, a widespread understanding that every citizen had both rights and responsibilities in defending their shared freedom. Schools were established throughout the realm to educate not just the children of nobles, but all young people in the history, laws, and values of their kingdom. The curriculum included practical training in civic defense, ensuring that no future invasion would find the population unprepared. Women, who had played crucial roles in the resistance, were granted new rights and opportunities. The example of Commander Blackthorn and the female merchants who had fought alongside their male counterparts led to laws allowing women to serve in the military and hold government positions previously reserved for men. The religious communities whose bells had helped coordinate the resistance were granted formal recognition as partners in the kingdom's governance. The cathedral that had served as Prince Adrian's platform for his crucial speech was designated as a national shrine to freedom, with its bells maintained in perpetuity as a reminder of that pivotal day. Marcus found his new role as Captain General both challenging and rewarding. The reformed Royal Guard incorporated lessons learned from both the conspiracy and the resistance, creating a force that was more professional, more accountable, and more deeply connected to the people they served. Regular training exercises were conducted with civilian volunteers, ensuring that guards and citizens could work together effectively in future crises. The isolation that had allowed corruption to take root in the old system was replaced with transparency and community engagement. The Shadow Guard, under Commander Blackthorn's leadership, evolved from a secretive organization into a specialized intelligence service that operated within clear legal boundaries. Their activities were overseen by a committee that included representatives from various sectors of society, ensuring that their power could never again be turned against the kingdom's legitimate interests. Prince Adrian himself had been transformed more than anyone. The young man who had once moved through the palace in comfortable ignorance of the threats surrounding him had become a leader who understood that true security came from the loyalty and strength of free people, not from high walls and isolated towers. His approach to governance reflected this understanding. Instead of issuing proclamations from the throne room, he regularly traveled throughout the kingdom, meeting with farmers, merchants, craftsmen, and soldiers to hear their concerns and ideas directly. These journeys, which became known as the Prince's Progresses, strengthened the bond between ruler and ruled in ways that centuries of traditional ceremony never could have achieved. The palace itself was redesigned to reflect these new relationships. The old throne room, with its emphasis on the distance between monarch and subject, was replaced with a circular council chamber, where the king's chair was no higher than any other seat. The message was clear: in the new Valdemar, leadership was about service, not domination. The royal gardens were open to the public on certain days, allowing ordinary citizens to walk the same paths that had once been reserved for nobility. Children who had never seen the palace except from a distance could now play in courtyards where their prince had learned his letters, creating connections that bridged the gap between different levels of society. Even the royal family's daily routines changed to reflect their new understanding of their role. Meals were often shared with guests from various walks of life, and formal ceremonies included representatives from all sectors of society, rather than just the hereditary nobility. The economic policies of the kingdom were also transformed. The corruption that had siphoned wealth away from public projects was replaced with transparent budgeting processes that allowed citizens to see exactly how their taxes were being used. Infrastructure projects that had been delayed for years were completed rapidly, improving life throughout the realm. Trade policies were reformed to favor local merchants and craftsmen over foreign interests, ensuring that Valdemar's wealth stayed within its borders to benefit its own people. The guild system, which had proven so effective during the resistance, was formalized as a partner in economic planning and development. The military reforms went beyond simple reorganization. The new army incorporated citizen soldiers who trained regularly but maintained their civilian occupations, creating a force that was deeply rooted in the communities it defended. Professional soldiers worked alongside these citizen defenders, sharing their expertise while learning from the local knowledge and motivation that had made the resistance so effective. Fortifications throughout the kingdom were rebuilt with input from the people who would have to defend them. Instead of imposing fortress designs, military engineers worked with local communities to create defensive positions that took advantage of natural features and local resources. The diplomatic revolution was equally significant. Valdemar's ambassadors to other kingdoms were no longer drawn exclusively from noble families, but included merchants, scholars, and even former soldiers who could speak authentically about the kingdom's new character. These representatives carried a message that resonated far beyond Valdemar's borders, that a nation's true strength came from the freedom and prosperity of its people. Other kingdoms began to study the Valdemar model, seeking to understand how a traditional monarchy had transformed itself into something new without losing its essential stability. Delegations of foreign officials visited regularly, observing the new institutions and processes that had emerged from the crisis. But for all the institutional changes, the most important transformation was in the realm of ideas. The people of Valdemar had learned that they were not powerless subjects dependent on their ruler's benevolence, but citizens with the ability and responsibility to shape their own destiny. This change in perspective affected every aspect of life in the kingdom. Farmers who had once accepted whatever prices merchants offered for their goods now organized cooperatives to negotiate better terms. Craftsmen who had competed destructively against each other formed associations to share techniques and improve quality. Workers who had endured poor conditions without complaint now demanded fair treatment and reasonable hours. The changes weren't always smooth. Some traditional nobles resented the reduction in their privileges, and some foreign trading partners had to be convinced that the new Valdemar was still a reliable partner. There were occasional conflicts between different groups as they negotiated their new roles in society. But the foundation of shared experience during the crisis provided a strong base for resolving these difficulties. People who had fought side by side against invasion found ways to work together through the challenges of peace. The memory of what they had accomplished together gave them confidence that they could overcome any obstacle. As the first anniversary of Duke Aldrich's defeat approached, preparations began for a celebration that would honor not just the victory, but the transformation it had sparked. The festival would last for 3 days, with events that showcased the various ways the kingdom had changed and grown. The celebration would begin with a ceremony at the cathedral, where Prince Adrian had made his crucial speech. The bells that had called the people to resist would ring again, not in alarm, but in triumph. Survivors of the battle would be honored, and the names of those who died defending freedom would be read aloud and recorded in a permanent memorial. The second day would feature demonstrations of the new civic institutions, mock trials showing the improved justice system, displays of the citizen defense forces, and presentations by the various guilds and organizations that had become partners in governance. Children would participate in educational programs that taught them about their rights and responsibilities as citizens. The third day would be devoted to cultural celebration, with music, art, and storytelling that reflected the kingdom's renewed spirit. Foreign delegations would be invited to observe and participate, spreading the message that Valdemar had found a new way of organizing society that respected both tradition and innovation. Prince Adrian, now formally recognized as heir apparent and deeply involved in day-to-day governance, looked forward to the celebration as a chance to measure how far the kingdom had come. But he also knew it would be a reminder that the work of building a better society was never finished. Standing in his rebuilt chambers as the sun set over the capital city, he could see the lights of thousands of homes where families lived in freedom and security. The palace walls no longer separated him from his people. They connected him to them, serving as a symbol of their shared commitment to the values that made Valdemar worth defending. Marcus joined him at the window, as had become their evening custom. The Captain General's face bore new lines earned through responsibility and stress, but his eyes held a peace that had been absent during the dark days of conspiracy and invasion. "Do you think we've truly changed things for the better, Your Highness?" Marcus asked, a question that had become a regular part of their evening conversations. Prince Adrian considered the question seriously, as he always did. "I think we've learned that change is a continuous process, not a destination. The palace has changed forever, but so have we. And as long as we remember the lessons we've learned and stay committed to the principles we've discovered, we can keep changing for the better." Below them, the city of Aldara settled into the peaceful rhythms of evening, secure in the knowledge that their freedom was protected by more than walls and guards. It was protected by their own strength, unity, and determination. The palace had indeed changed forever, and in changing, it had helped transform an entire kingdom into something stronger, more just, and more resilient than anyone had dared to imagine.